Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Adam. This is the Rebel News Daily live stream. I am your host, Sheila Gunn Reid, with my co-host, Adam Sos, and bear with us, everybody who's watching today, because our usual producer is off for the day, taking a much-deserved, well-needed day off. So we have Olivia with us, and so we're just going to all do our best to get through the next hour together without any sort of technical catastrophes, and I'm sure we will, and if we do, who cares? That's the burdens of live TV. I should tell everybody what we're doing here. This, as I said, is the Rebel News Daily live stream. And it's a chance for us to talk about the news of the day and interact with our viewers and with each other, like my friend Adam, who's currently furiously typing away on his computer. I'm not even sure if Adam knows that we're on right now. Adam, do you know that we're on? We're live? I don't think he knows. Anyway, we'll connect with Adam in a second. This is the Rebel News Daily live stream. It used to just be hosted on Friday just by Ezra Levant, and things are things are a little complicated right now. Anyway, we used to just stream on YouTube. But then when Joe Biden got elected, YouTube sort of let the masks slip. They didn't have to pretend anymore. And so they cracked down hard. Adam, I can hear you. On
I'm back now.
They cracked down. Are you there, Adam?
I am. I didn't have any audio for me, so I was just waiting politely for a while.
I was just telling everybody what we're doing, and I've got a severe echo from Adam. So it sounds like we've got two audio sources from Adam.
I've got some echo too. Yeah.
So let's maybe just keep Adam a little bit hushed while I finish telling everybody what's going on, and while the studio sorts everything out. So anyways, we used to just live stream on YouTube. But as I was saying, YouTube, once Joe Biden got elected, they cracked down completely on conservatives. They weren't even pretending anymore. They completely demonetized us after rendering us ad unsafe a little while ago. So we couldn't accept something called a super chat from our supporters, which was a way for you to support the work that we do and ask us questions live on air. Unlike what Justin Trudeau makes you do with the mainstream media, where he just reaches into your pocket and to your family's wallet and just gives it to media companies that you don't like, would never consume if you had a choice. So while we continue to broadcast on YouTube, it is not a revenue source for us, but there are nearly 1.6 million of you there, so we don't want to abandon you. So we still broadcast there, but we also simultaneously broadcast over on Rumble, Odyssey, and Super U. I'm not sure if we're broadcasting there today because we have some technical hiccups, but hopefully we are. And if you are watching us there are different ways that you can support us on each one of those platforms. There's something called a Rumble Rant, an Odyssey Hyper Chat, and there's a couple different ways for you to do that. You can leave us library cryptocurrency, super chat, hyper chat from there, or you can just give us regular old fiat currency, whatever floats your boat. And on Super U, you can do something called a Super U shout, and you can tip us as a creator on those platforms, and it helps keep the lights on, and it will help us sort out whatever technical problems we have going on in the studio right now. Adam, can you hear me without an echo? Please say yes.
I can hear you, and there's no echo.
I've got.
Do you have an echo? Oh,
Big
no.
time. Big time. We still have a couple of different audio sources happening with Adam right now. Hopefully that's just on my end, and I'll do my best to cope. But maybe it is something that our viewers are hearing also on YouTube and some of the other platforms. So maybe I'll take a peek at some of the comments there. If you are hearing an echo from Adam, please comment in one of the platforms there so we can just see if we can sort it out. And Adam, why don't you, because you've already started working on this story, because it sort of happened over the weekend. You and I were messaging back and forth about how best to deal with this. Why don't you introduce one of the stories that is YouTube safe, because that's another thing about YouTube. We can talk about only certain things on YouTube. So if you see some of our work on YouTube, you might just see a snippet of it, and then we'll give you an instruction to evacuate the platform and go over to one that will, let you hear all of the news. So we were talking about this over the weekend. And Adam, why don't you bring us up to speed on this story about the paramedic that died in Airdrie?
Yeah, so there, unfortunately, a very tragic circumstance. A paramedic has passed away now. Most sources are sort of keeping his name private to not get it out there, so we'll do that to respect that as well. But an experienced paramedic, I believe a former firefighter as well. What we're hearing is effectively, and the suggestion is that he was on duty when this happened, had a heart attack, and because of some pretty abysmal mismanagement by Alberta Health Services, who would have you believe that all the issues we're facing with our healthcare system being overwhelmed are a result of a current sickness that's going around, simply not the case. We've been seeing these sort of code red situations where there are no ambulances available in parts of Alberta for years now. Very often, Airdrie, which is just outside of Calgary, 15 minutes north of Calgary, more or less, very often ambulances have to come all the way from Calgary, drive out of town, and get to them in order to get back. And very often in that amount of time, with the mismanagement issues, the centralization of these ambulance services, people are left not receiving an ambulance ride in the time they need to save their lives. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. A paramedic reportedly in the line of duty had a heart attack, and an ambulance could not get to them in time. Very tragic. The paramedic firefighter community here in Alberta is obviously shocked that they couldn't be there for one of their own. And then what's possibly even more upsetting about this is the article comes up from the Calgary Sun, a widely reported story. What's extremely troubling about this was Alberta Health Services then followed up with a response basically saying, oh, no, this had nothing to do with a lack of supplies. There's no issues whatsoever. And if you need help, here's like a help hotline that you can reach out to. Make sure you reach out for help. What's troubling there is the fact that they didn't get an ambulance there in time. Someone died, and they're saying, no, the system's working. The system is working as it should. There wasn't enough people there, so how much does the president of HS make? $600,000 a year, and things, despite spending increasing, quality of healthcare provision, particularly these emergency services, this has been an ongoing conversation for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I think this is one of those places, while we don't like to spend money on taxes, and we'd probably preferred privatized healthcare because we'd get better healthcare, this is one of those places where it's like, get the ambulances out there because there's emergencies. We want people to have those things available. So an extremely tragic story. Hopefully, though, for the family, there might be some comfort in the fact that hopefully this is a catharsis, that something may come of this, that there's some sort of emotional reprieve, because people are saying enough is enough. Alberta Health Services, we can get into some of the other stuff Alberta Health Services has done later, but Alberta Health Services cannot continue to fail, tell us what to do, not address serious issues, and take more and more of our tax dollars year after year.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions about this story. For example, this idea that Airdrie wasn't under red alert. Red alert is when there are no ambulances available in the jurisdiction. The problem with red alerts, particularly in jurisdictions outside of Edmonton, is a years-long problem. Years. This has been going on for years. I've got a friend who's a paramedic, Don Sharp. This is something that he is always banging the drum about. And a lot of it has to do with how people are admitted into the hospital, how they are taken into emergency departments. A lot of times the paramedics have to stay with the patient until they can get handed over to the hospital. And so that occupies paramedic teams. It occupies the ambulance, even though the patient is at the hospital, but in emerge, but is not taken in by the hospital. So the teams of paramedics have to stay there. And it creates this lack of resources out in the world, which is where you actually need the paramedics, and not down at the hospital waiting in the hallway because they can't figure out how to create a better system to better integrate people into the hospital once they get there. And secondarily, this gaslighting, as our friend Tim Moen puts it. Tim Moen's an Alberta firefighter who is he sort of organized a bunch of other firefighters who are against the vaccine mandate in their workplace, and they're being helped through the Democracy Fund. He calls this gaslighting because it absolutely is. at the same time, there is a Twitter account out there that all it does is tweet out red alerts. That's all it does. That should tell you how much of a problem this has been in hospitals forever. So this Twitter account on the morning of the 18th is tweeting out that Airdrie's under red alert. And they're tweeting this out, and this is sort of in and around the same time, and noted that just before 7 a.m. on Saturday, Airdrie was on red alert, meaning there were no available ambulances in the jurisdiction. At the very same time, a Calgary ambulance was called to Airdrie for this emergency. And yet, Alberta Health Services, Calgary ambulance responding from Calgary to an emergency event in Airdrie. And Airdrie is like 20 minutes away from a Calgary hospital. And yet, Alberta Health Services is busy saying that this is not related to a lack of resources. And I'm like you, I'm the last person who wants to spend money on Alberta Health Services, but this might be the one area where they really need to sort something out here. And tell me how laying off a bunch of firefighter paramedics because they don't want to comply with the vaccine mandate system helped any of this. You know, heads should roll.
That's why AHS issued this response, in my opinion. It's part of the ongoing narrative of we're absolutely fine, we've got this, we don't need these people. We can talk about what Jyoti said about these people later once we're off YouTube. But this is 100% part of the ongoing spin from Alberta Health Services that denies the facts. They deny the facts on everything. There's literally a red alert. An ambulance didn't get to one of their own, and they have the audacity to put out this gaslighting tweet saying, no, what clearly happened here isn't what happened here. And you know what? I'm sure they figured out some technicality where, well, technically there was an ambulance. It was just, it's ridiculous. I've also heard stories with some of the centralization of some of these ambulance services where based on like the 911 operator you get, and this is strictly anecdotal, so don't make too much of it, but someone might think like, without a great idea, it isn't like it's like a digital map. These are people sort of eyeballing it. So like I've heard of people sending an ambulance from like Calgary to Wetaskiwin instead of Edmonton because they don't have like an adequate layout of ambulances and they don't exactly know where to get people faster. So I've heard of some absolutely unbelievable mismanagement by Alberta Health Services. Again, this is what happens when anything gets too massive and bureaucratic. And in a free market healthcare system, what would happen is no one would utilize these providers. Alberta Health Services would be out of business. They'd be a laughingstock. They'd be gone. Certainly their CEO wouldn't be making $600,000 a year. They would be out of business. And competitive businesses that have a streamlined thing. Listen, Skip the Dishes could do a better job managing getting ambulances to people's houses than Alberta Health Services. Seriously, I can get a pizza faster than an ambulance in this ridiculous province with this ridiculous healthcare management. So, again, to the family out there, extremely sorry for what you've gone through. We are going to be talking to Tim Moen and one or two other people, hopefully, and bringing you an update on the personal story. But let's not let this just be another, oh, well, it's really bad that AHS is bad. This should be one of those moments that really acts as an agent to bring about some change among these frontline emergency responders to say enough is enough. We deserve better. I know these folks, they are on the cusp. They're about to break. So many paramedics are just working, and they have been for years. This isn't because of COVID-19. It's because the system simply doesn't work and it needs to be streamlined and made more efficient.
Right. I think the thing about COVID-19 that made this worse for them is laying off a bunch of their colleagues, their perfectly healthy colleagues. And the real tragedy is this firefighter EMT, he was on the job when this happened. He was actively on the job when he had a heart attack, which bears some other questions, but I don't want to speculate.
Well, and to that point, though, the wild thing here is like, if a police officer got into trouble, other cops would be their priority numero uno, no questions asked. They would be there right on the spot. When a paramedic goes into trouble, I'm sure in the United States, I'm sure in other real parts of the world, they're there immediately because that's one of their very own. This is like a doctor dropping in the hospital and they can't find a doctor. It's absolutely unsettling. It's unsettling.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next thing. I could talk about how bad the healthcare system is all day and how mismanaged it is all day. But let's talk about this next thing, because this next thing is directly on the Liberals. And everybody knew this was going to happen. So Frog Lake First Nation members concerned after $120 million goes missing. So Frog Lake First Nation, it's northeast of Edmonton, a couple hours. Very, very wealthy First Nation, lots of oil and gas there. And they've got, the band's trust fund went from $102 million in 2013 to $3 million in 2019. The band is short $120 million in net assets over a 5-year time period between 2013 and 2018. Records show band-owned business called Frog Lake Energy Resources has been losing millions of dollars since 2015. The losses are not explained to band members, and Doris Stanley, she's a member of Frog Lake First Nation, she's pushing for a financial audit of her band's books. And for those of us outside of the First Nations community, she says, others have been asking the current administration for a full forensic audit since 2019 and the previous administration before that. People are entitled to know the truth. What happened to that money? Chief Greg Desjardins and council have not provided a full audit yet. They've brought in a lawyer to try to force one. Now, I've got, and this, if you read the next line here, other Frog Lake band members who had only talked to APTN on condition of anonymity, that's important here, over fears of retribution, say that a full financial audit should include any spending by band-owned companies, current salaries of the chief and council, and any money they make through band-owned businesses. Okay. This would not be going on in any other community in Canada, but this is allowed to go on in First Nations communities, and it is not because of First Nations people. They want accountability. The drive for accountability in First Nations communities is coming from First Nations people, and it's so often actually First Nations ladies. I think the ladies who prompted the First Nations Accountability Act, they were on a reserve in Saskatchewan, I think, and they worked with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation to get that law passed. But I can go onto my little tiny rural community and I can find out what my mayor makes, what all the councillors make. I can find out, you know, by and large, how they voted, where all the spending is. There's a full forensic audit done. I know the money coming in. I know the money coming out. First Nations people are entitled to that too. This is a town just like any other town, and they deserve to know where the band-owned businesses are spending their money, who's getting that money. They don't even know how much their chief makes. Isn't that outrageous? You know? Yeah. And the point of all of this is, and I mentioned it, I sort of touched on it, the First Nations Transparency Act, Financial Transparency Act. It was passed in 2013 by Stephen Harper. And the First Nations Financial Transparency Act required that 581 First Nations make their audited, consolidated financial statements and the pay and expenses of chief and council available to their members, as well as publish it on a website. These financial documents included under this old law, audited financial statements, pay, auditor's written report respecting the consolidated financial statement. So anything that may be hinky that is noted by the financial auditor, that should be listed there too. And so this was something that Stephen Harper did to provide accountability to band members. And it doesn't mean that your chief is ripping you off, but if your chief isn't ripping you off, he should be happy to say, here's what I make, here's what I spent your money on, here's the investments of the band. Stephen Harper did that. What is one of the very first things Justin Trudeau did? December 2015, 1 month after getting elected, Justin Trudeau did away with this. And now, here we go. We've got a problem in a very rich First Nation at Frog Lake, where $120 million has just disappeared off the books, and they don't have any recourse. They don't have any recourse. They've tried to force, and God help them, they've tried to force an audit, but there's no obligation for there to be an audit. There's no law on the books that they're entitled to any of this. This is a monstrosity, and this is not reconciliation.
Well, you pointed out this note about the fact that they wanted anonymity for fear of retribution. Yeah, a mob that's just stolen $100 million, they're gonna have some power. This is the problem. It is run like a small town Italian mob city. What happens out here, and it's upsetting, because what happened with Stephen Harper, they effectively called him a fascist. They were calling him a Hitler. They were calling Harper all these terrible things. And what he was doing was bringing the same level of dignity and respect that you or I would expect when we're paying taxes, that same level of accountability. He was bringing that to First Nations people so that they would be on even footing. It wouldn't be the chief and friends living in luxury and the community living in squalor. There would be some transparency. That was probably, that law, one of the biggest steps forward in improving the quality and caliber of life and reducing corruption among some of these communities. Now, don't get me wrong, some of these chiefs are great, don't take much salary, generate a lot of business, bring people in. Let's take, for example, the Wet'suwet'en, the actual elected Wet'suwet'en officials who are bringing in jobs and creating lucrative employment for their communities. So there are chiefs out there. This is not to make a blanket statement to say that all these band councils are corrupt. Far from it, in fact. But if a band council is corrupt, you need these mechanisms to counteract them, because otherwise you can effectively have people taking millions and millions of dollars with no accountability whatsoever. And then they exercise such power that people are afraid to even come forward and say, yeah, that guy stole $25 million, $100 million is missing here, $100 million is missing there. What this boils down to ultimately, though, is Justin Trudeau revoked that law so that they could do sketchy business and use the Indigenous smokescreen to cover up those dealings. I have little doubt that, maybe not in this case particularly, but very often it is big contract companies, SNC-Lavalin, these major law firms that aren't doing nothing to help Indigenous communities, but are doing a lot to line their pockets. And they're only getting away with it because there's no transparency with these organizations. So yeah, this is, I mean, ultimately what this, I'm not trying to sound woke here or anything, but it's just racist. It's treating a group of Canadians with a sort of infantilizing attitude, and like they're not meritorious of the same level of respect and accountability that we would expect from our leaders. Most of these bands are now elected representation, and with elected representation should come transparency and accountability. There's space to respect traditions, and there is space to honor the autonomy of these First Nations people on their quote-unquote unceded land. But when the government is giving them massive sums of money, and when those sums of money are mysteriously going missing and people are afraid to even dare speak out about it because of fear of retribution, there's clearly a need for transparency, accountability, and forensic auditing.
First Nations people are entitled to the same level of transparency that every other Canadian resident is. That's what this comes down to. Sorry, I wasn't ignoring you as you were talking. I was furiously Googling something because I wanted to just show you the level of lack of accountability that takes place here. Jason Kenney's salary is $186,000 plus, you know, some perks. $186,000.
That's still too much, but yeah.
yeah. $186,000 plus some perks, and they had a pay cut not too long ago of about 5%. But Alberta politicians remain the highest paid in the entire country, and there are 4.5 million Albertans. Seems like being the premier of Alberta might be a big job. Anyways, Frog Lake First Nation. The former chief, Clifford Stanley of Frog Lake First Nation, which it seems like it's under the former chief where all of these losses took place, Clifford Stanley, who's related, by the way, to the lady who's trying to get accountability. They're related through marriage. Back a few years ago, he did actually reveal his salary. However, there was no obligation for him to do so. From 2017 to 2018, his salary was $104,000 plus $151,000 in travel, and $61,000 from the FLER, bringing his salary to over $300,000. He makes nearly twice, or he did nearly twice, what the Alberta Premier does. The councillors, by the way, when you see the population of Frog Lake, you're going to be like, how are there several councillors? There's should be 2, and it should be a part-time job. Several councillors are earning more than $150,000, so close to what the Premier makes. The Premier of Alberta, 4.5 million people. You know how many people are in Frog Lake? 3,300, approximately the size of Lamont, Alberta, where being the mayor and being a town councillor is literally a part-time job where you take home maybe $700-800 a year or something akin to that. So that's how out of pace that some of these salaries are. But maybe it is a big job that entitles that much money.
Well, it's a lot of work to launder. It's a lot of work to launder $100 million. Laundering $100 million is a lot of work.
Well, we don't want to accuse them of anything because we haven't seen the audited financial statements. But I'll hear arguments that it's worth that much money. Yeah. But you're going to have to show your work in the form of an audited statement.
That isn't even one of the more, I've heard more egregious salaries with lower populations.
Oh, like 300 I've seen.
Yeah, I think I've heard 486 or something. There's some comparison where someone was making almost the same amount as the president of the United States, and they had a relatively low population. But it's and the question is, if this $100 million is missing, and again, we don't know, so we're not making any allegations, but it's highly unlikely that the chief does not know anything about that, or that these councillors know nothing about it, given that it's band owned and band managed. So the fact that amount of money has gone missing, that $300,000 or so is what's been declared publicly, but where are the rest of these funds?
Yep.
And the answer, yeah.
Well,
and again, this wouldn't happen. Actually, you know what? I'm lying. I think we're actually off base here. We say that we expect the same level of transparency, but the Liberal government of Canada loses way more money than this on infrastructure projects. So I think what we've done is we are receiving the same treatment as them, but instead of elevating their fiscal transparency, we've reduced ours. And make no mistake that things have gotten worse under the Trudeau government. The fiscal policy is just about as transparent as the water on some of these First Nations territories, and that is not at all. It's a toxic environment created by the Liberals on all fronts. And I don't know what the horizon is. I don't know what the prospectus is, because things are just getting worse.
Yeah,
billions of dollars have gone missing under the Liberals that wouldn't have happened before. They're making it like the politics of these of some of these First Nations communities, where it's like, who are you to ask? And people are afraid to speak out because there might be retribution. The Lebranos,
there
indeed.
Always is. Yeah. You're making an excellent point. This is just the same sort of culture of secrecy. There's some of this stuff this is a really good article by APTN. There's a chartered accountant and certified fraud examiner with more than 30 years of experience, Dave Oswald, said Frog Lake should be prosperous. Yeah, this place is 30 kilometers from Bonnyville. What people from outside of Alberta don't realize, that when you hear oil sands, you think of Fort McMurray. But that's just one way of getting oil sands out of the ground, through the mining in Fort McMurray. Bonnyville, Cold Lake area, the Lakeland area, that's all SAGD, so steam activated. I forget what SAGD stands for. But anyways, what they do is they drill down, inject steam into the ground, and it liquefies the oil from the sand and brings it up. So it's close to conventional drilling, but not really. And that's all Bonnyville, Cold Lake area. That's all oil sands out there, but it's northeast of the capital region. And this is a band that's out there, and they should be insanely rich. This chartered accountant points out, they should be living in mansions there, but they're not. They said this should be a model band in Canada. They should be telling the government to stuff it because we don't need your money. We're a self-sufficient band. But it's not like that at all. That they keep going to the government, hat in hand, looking for money all the time.
And it's just the thing is it's always the people who suffer. I made a joke about GOT Gondek in a video that'll be out soon, calling with this climate emergency stuff Leonardo DiCaprio the modern Marie Antoinette. But this is very much the same circumstance where when $100 million goes missing, those elected officials and the people who are getting their salary aren't suffering. The people are living in squalor. When infrastructure projects, billions of dollars of infrastructure projects go missing, the liberal elite, they don't suffer. We end up paying more taxes and our costs of living go up, and they just print more money. But ultimately, they don't suffer. We do. The chiefs don't suffer, the people out there do. So it's just sad to see how much there's no accountability, no transparency. And then when the consequences unfold, they're ultimately passed down to the most marginalized and the most vulnerable in society, whether on or off frog leg territory, or for folks in rural Canada, small town people, lower income people who are just trying to get by. They end up suffering as a result of this greed, and ultimately as a result of these undemocratic policies.
And before I get any letters or text messages from my husband, SAGD is steam-assisted gravity drainage, and it is as I described. They drill down, one of the pipes is steam, and then they liquefy, and then it brings it up. But anyways, that's one of the ways of getting oil sands out of the ground that has a very tiny, tiny footprint that the hippies don't want you to know about. So we should be getting ready to sign off of YouTube. We somehow made it halfway through the show without having to remove ourselves. But before we go, guys in studio, can you tell us, do you have a promo for Dr. Julie's book? Okay, well, just pull up the website then. That's great. Thank you, Efron.
Sure.
So this is the website for Dr. Julie Ponesse's book. She works very closely with the Democracy Fund. Dr. Julie Ponesse, her book is called My Choice, The Ethical Case Against COVID-19 Vaccine Mandates. She lost her job at a Canadian university because of the vaccine mandates. And frankly, I don't know if Dr. Julie's vaccinated, and I don't think it matters. What is important is that she was not willing to divulge her vaccination status to her employer to keep her job. And so this book details sort of her personal choice for freedom, and provides advice to those people who maybe feel alone, and that you're not alone, and that what you've done is the ethical thing to do for yourself. And so that book is available on Amazon, guys, I believe. Yes, Amazon,
ebook,
of course.
Amazon, Indigo. Yeah.
The works.
Yeah.
The works.
And I know even Jordan Peterson was tweeting this out, encouraging people to get it. He's read the book, picked up a copy. It's incredible. I've got one on the way. It hasn't arrived yet, but I've got one on the way. I'm looking forward to reading it. I think it is so important that for someone from this sort of elite academic class to throw that all away, because it's to being so principled to say, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, and to walk away from that on principle. I think it's so important that we support Dr. Julie Ponesse, because we need more people taking that principled stance. If we had one person, two professors, prestigious professors from each university across the country saying enough is enough, I'm not going to do this anymore, it would send ripples through academia. So go to mychoicebook.ca, grab a copy, and support Dr. Julie for what she's done.
Yeah, she's the pandemics ethics scholar over at the Democracy Fund. And for those of you who are interested, over the Christmas break, she is the guest on The Gun Show. So I've got a copy of her book. I'm going to read it, and then we'll interview her this week, and that video will go live. Not this Wednesday, but it will be the Wednesday after. So the Wednesday during the Christmas holiday. Sit down, snuggle up, watch Sheila and Dr. Julie talk about the state of the world and bioethics, if you like. And I think you will. Okay, thank you. Yeah. I think we are ready to sign off of YouTube and talk about the things that YouTube says that are just too hot for your pretty little minds. Is that right?
We'll wait for the nod to make sure.
Efron says, excuse me, we can play the